go over the books, and they are just finding crazy shit. In Japan, I had no idea that they had made the sarcophagus covers in Japan that were exactly the same as the ones they made in Egypt.
And in a place, there is supposed to be zero connection between ancient Japan and ancient Egypt.
In 2016, the famous Chinese geochemist Sun Weidong quoted Sima Qian's description of the topography of the Xia Empire, traditionally regarded as China's founding dynasty, dating from 2070 to 1600 BC. Northwards, the stream is divided and becomes the 9 rivers. Reunited, it forms the opposing river and flows into the sea, wrote Sima Qian in his 1st century historiography. In other words, the stream in question wasn't China's famed Yellow River, which flows from west to east. There is only one major river in the world which flows northwards. Which one is it? The professor asked. The Nile, someone replied. It is only through a diligent study of the past that one can perceive the mosaic of the self. Much has been made about the arrival of the Vikings in America before Columbus, and yet, comparatively, there are orders of magnitude more pieces of evidence that show that Africans, in multiple waves, brought civilization to Asia, especially well into the Far East. Beyond the classical civilizations in the Mediterranean and Mesoamericas, there is plentiful but little known and undeniable evidence of an African seeding of civilization in Asia, and an even more surprising evidence of Africans' presence all the way at the other side of the globe, in Japan. And this evidence dates back to pharaonic times. When taken into account, it shows that Africans had a civilization that not only circumvented the globe, but also left its mark in the form of culture, writing, religion, architecture, mathematics, science, and genetics, all of which we will cover today. From the hieroglyphs in ancient China to the Nubio-Kemetic Egyptian-like sarcophagus in Japan and the numerous depictions of black Africans in the Far East, let's explore how the often forgotten influence of the Africans helped shape Chinese civilization. Note again that in our quest to cover African historical truths, we distinguish between civilizations that were African and civilizations that were seeded by Africans. In other words, when we say a civilization has been seeded by black Africans, we are showing that the science, culture, religion, technology, influential members of the early civilization, and often early rulers, comes from black Africa. What we are not saying is that the indigenous people who benefited were not capable of civilization building, and in fact, in many cases, they went on to build civilizations that are grandiose, well after the African colonists weren't there anymore. And in our pursuit for truth, we must follow where the evidence takes us. This is the Without History channel. Every episode, we bring salient facts about African ancient civilizations in history and detail how these ancient civilizations set the foundation of our modern world. We dive deep into what research reveals about the often overlooked and misattributed contributions about these key eras in our collective history. This channel would not exist without the invaluable support of our benefactors. As the Ashanti proverb goes, no contribution is too small. You can find various ways to support us in the video description. You will also find a multitude of sources for those that like to dive deeper into these subjects. Remember Professor Sun Weidong that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, who showed that the Xia dynasty rulers stated their origins as ancient Egypt? Well, Sun also showed that China's Bronze Age technology, widely thought by scholars to have first entered the northwest of the country through the prehistoric Silk Road, actually came from ancient Egypt. In the past year, Sun asserted that the founders of Chinese civilization were not in any sense Chinese, but actually migrants from Egypt. He conceived of this connection in the 1990s while performing radiometric dating of ancient Chinese bronzes. To his surprise, their chemical composition more closely resembled those of ancient Egyptian bronzes than native Chinese ores. Isn't that telling that the radiometric signature of the bronze that happens to have significantly contributed to China's earliest founding dynasty? That signature is not Chinese, nor of the surrounding region. It is not European, and it is not random, but it is from Africa. This shows that the technology revolution that sparked the Chinese story came from Africa. And we will later on see that it is not just metallurgy that the Africans brought with them, but also writing, religion, and culture. There is another civilization that bears signs of African seeding, and it is the most Eastern civilization. The land of the rising sun. The early African influence here shows how far the reach of the ancient African civilization was. In the book Encounter with Logos, author Eric Stahl demonstrates how ancient Japanese and ancient Egyptian share a multitude of words that not only share pronunciation, but also meaning. A striking example of this is the word for house, which is ka in the African Kemetic language, and minka in Japanese, meaning private house. In his book, Stahl comes to the conclusion that the intersection between the two languages are too numerous to attribute to chance, and that one language was clearly seeded by the other. And since ancient Egyptian is the older of the two, it stands to reason that Egyptians birthed the foundational element of Japanese culture. Another interesting marker of cultural influence is the presence of identical sarcophagus covers in Japan and Kemet. One of the mysteries of Japanese ancient history is the short megalithic period that yielded surprising monumental stone carvings, with some weighing over 15 tons. The most surprising of these stoneworks is this sarcophagus covering. It is identical to that found in early dynastic era of ancient Egypt. The dimensions of the side indentations and the angles and proportions all match. What are the chances of finding an exact sarcophagus covering in Egypt and Japan? What are then the chances that these coverings are not just similar, but identical to the point of being interchangeable? And when you add to this the fact that Japanese language is shown to be genetically related to ancient Nubio-Kemetic language, then the chances of these being by chance are astronomically low. The whole Japanese culture, so revered today, bears all the hallmarks of an almost identical civilization in Africa, one that was said to have descended from the Nubio-Kemetic Civilization itself. That third wave of African colonization would have happened after the fall of Kemet. In a recent genetic study, Dr. Didiakomo showed that the Edo people in Nigeria share the same haplogroup as the Japanese people. And in fact, no other Asian group has this specific marker that is predominantly found in the Edo people. This finding is in line with the multitude of similarities that are found between the Japanese people and the Edo people. From language, again with intersections too numerous to be attributable to chance, to art, to religion, and many other aspects of both cultures. At the end of the video, we share an interesting excerpt from the YouTube channel African History Station, yet another gem of African history and Renaissance. The implications of this cannot be understated. It would mean that the Edo people of Nigeria not only built the greatest archaeological structure in history of humanity, the Great Wall of Benin, to protect their city whom European explorers have described as well ahead of European capitals at the time. But further to this, the undeniable evidence of the colonization of Japan by the Edo people shows that they knew how to navigate the seas with exactitude. The mainstream historical narrative has it that China started to colonize Japan around the 1st century AD, but the Chinese themselves left us some interesting clues on who started their main dynasties, and it was revealed by one of China's most renowned historians. We have seen previously how those who sparked the Bronze Age in China, the dynasty called the Xia, came from Africa, to their own admission, and the archaeological evidence shows it too. But in the Shang dynasty, we see a second equally massive and influential wave of Africans coming to China to establish what we now know as the Shang dynasty, the dynasty that brought pretty much all the hallmarks of what we now associate with ancient China. And what did the Shang dynasty rulers and famous figures look like? They looked like this. In a significant number of Shang dynasty artifacts, we see Africans depicted with all their key traits: subnasal prognathism, thick lips, high cheekbones, broad flat nose. They show up on this ornate yew tigris vase, or again on this 1650 BC jade statuette of an African woman, complete with the distinctive African art style still found all over the continent. Really incredible craftsmanship on this hard stone. Shout out to the debunker for providing some amazing pictures. Do check out his and Quelimika's channel. The level of research that is coming out of Black History Channel on YouTube would have made Diop and Van Sertima proud. And on this 1600 BC jade statuettes. Another favorite piece of mine is the Da He Ding. Again on this piece, not just the expertise in bronze work, but also the unmistakable ethnicity of the portrayed figure are highlighted. And just like in Greek texts, the Chinese have many references to black people in the mists. According to the Book of Jin, Chinese Emperor Xiaowu of Jin was the son of a black woman named Li Lingrong. At that time, she, Li Lingrong, was a palace servant. In the weaving workshop, she was tall in shape and black in color. Everyone in the palace called her Kunlun. Kunlun also refers to a faraway land. Or again in the Rite of Zhou, more than a millennia after the arrival of the second wave of Africans to China, it is reported that a whole nation within China was black. Quote, "At the second place is rivers and lakes, Sichuan-zhe. Its animals are scaly, its plants are oily, and its people are black and oily." End quote. And they also show up in archaeological skeletal remains in large numbers from the Xia, First Dynasty in China, to the Shang, Second Dynasty in China, before eventually being replaced by the Zhou, Third Dynasty in China. It is this last dynasty that was Mongoloid in type, and that came to replace all previous population types in China. Negroid skeletons dating to the early periods of southern Chinese history have been found in Shandong, Jianteng, Sichuan, Yunnan, Pearl River Delta, and Jiangxi, especially at the initial sites of Qingliangang, Qingliankang, and Majiabang, Machiapang phases. See K.C. Chang, The Archaeology of Ancient China, performed from Yale University. The Qingliangang culture is often referred to as the Ta-Wen-Kao, Dawanku culture of North China. The presence of Negroid skeletal remains at Dawanku sites make it clear that Negroes spread out from the north to South China. The Dawanku culture predates the Lungshan culture, which is associated with the Xia civilization. So this means that the predominant cranial type found in the early and pre-dynastic era of China, pre-Xia and Xia dynasties, were Africoid. Even the term Li Min used by the Zhou dynasty to indicate the founders of the Chinese civilization translates to black-headed people, an appellation that is shared with the Sumero-Akkadian term Sagigga, also translating to the black-headed people. We have already covered how early Sumerians were unmistakably black in previous videos, so it is interesting to see that halfway across the world we find this same appellation again, and this time used by the Mongoloid Zhou dynasty on the originators of Chinese civilization. And the names or title of many of the early Shang dynasty kings also showed a black origin, from Zhuangwang, meaning black king, Zhuangdi, meaning black emperor, and many others. But if you have been following our channel for some time, you know that this is not surprising, and that human phenotypes change rapidly to adapt to environmental pressures, enabling better adapted people to thrive within the span of a few millennia. And that flow and travel of new genes into different regions of the globe happened far quicker than previously thought, and allowed for them to be tested over a few generations. Also note that these specific waves of African seeding of Chinese civilization are different from the earlier wave of Negritos Black, who came much earlier. Unlike the Xia and Shang wave, the Negritos did not bring key civilizing elements with them that we can detect from the historical record. As we have seen, the Chinese left a multitude of historical records about the presence and influence of the African. But when they did so, They used an all too familiar way of writing to do so. In 1990 BC, the god King Fuxi bestowed onto the land that was to become the empire of the Middle. Government, domestication, cooking, philosophy, rule of law, monument building, as well as kanji, the system writing. These injections of culture set into motion the great wheel that was to become the Empire of China. As its first emperor, we must ask, where did he and the people he belongs to come from? Where did he draw his wealth of knowledge and culture from? Before we go back to the genetic, osteologic, bone studies, cultural, and historical evidence, let us first cover the often ignored evidence of the similarities between Chinese characters and hieroglyphics. And here, the similarities are once more too numerous to attribute to chance. Let us begin with the fact that both writing systems use logograms. These systems of writing use symbols or signs to convey meaning for a whole word. We have seen this before in our video, where we reviewed the evidence that multiple Mesoamerican writing systems have their roots in the Kemetic hieroglyphics. We see the same pattern again here, where a very large number of words can be seen to have the same logos, the same symbols, as the Medu-Necher, the Kemetic writing system. These representations and similarities are more pronounced as we go further back in time. See how the representations of sky and sun are virtually identical or similar in roots to their Egyptian counterpart. Also notice how the older version of the Chinese characters look even closer to Medu-Necher. In some instances, the symbols are pretty much interchangeable. See the ancient Egyptian logos for child and that of the Chinese, and there are a lot more. If I have enough funding, I would love to commission a cladogram, a phylogenetic study between the Chinese writing system and ancient Egyptian. I think the results would be fascinating. I'll leave the links in the description for you to explore, and if you want to support us in this effort. Further to the identical form and meaning of these characters, Chinese is also written top to bottom, and independent forms of writing that are top to bottom are very rare. But it so happens that hieroglyphics also falls within that category, as it can be written top to bottom, but also left to right and right to left. The Aztec writing system is also top to bottom, but we have already covered in other videos how Mesoamerican civilization were kickstarted by the Africans from Kemet. See our previous episodes on this. A particular aspect of ancient Chinese culture that has endured to this day is the tradition of excellence and artistry in its calligraphy system. The refined calligraphy of the Chinese writing mimics the tradition of perfectionism in writing hieroglyphics. So Chinese writing system didn't just borrow the characters and their meaning from Kemet, but they also inherited its essence and its art. But if ancient Chinese writing is a derivative of hieroglyphics, who brought it to China? And did they bring anything else? Pyramids. Pyramids aplenty. 100 pyramids in the area of Xi in central China. This evidence is very consequential, because soon after the pyramid building experience from Kemet begins, and as black people are shown to be moving east in around 2500 BC, pyramids and mastabas are appearing in central China. At the end of the Second World War, U.S. Air Corps pilot named James Gaussman claimed to have seen a gigantic white jewel-topped pyramid while flying between India and China during World War II. But his statement was kept a closely guarded secret of the U.S. military for 45 years before it became public knowledge. All the way back in the Xia dynasty, China was building pyramids, and some even larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. This points to the fact that the leaders at the time had access to a significant amount of labor. That means, even back in this remote period, China already had a large population, probably thanks to the agricultural revolution brought about by the Africans at the top of the Shang dynasty. But the similarities to Kemet don't stop there. The ancient Chinese also practiced mummification. In fact, one of the best preserved mummies is Lady Dai from the Han dynasty in 206 AD. Or like this 700-year-old mummy discovered by chance in eastern China, we witness the hand of the Africans again. China, just like Egypt, also performed sarcophagus burials for their kings. Just look at these magnificent tombs from Chinese 6th century emperors and compare them to the Egyptian king sarcophagus. Let's remember that the oldest sarcophagus in Egypt dates back to 2613 BC, at the time of the building of the pyramids. So the Kemetic tradition would have been much older, and thus the originator. Ancient Chinese afterlife is also borrowed from the Kemetic concept of afterlife. Ancient Chinese believed that the spirit or soul would continue as they had in life. This mimics exactly what the ancient Egyptian believed and practiced. In fact, just like the Old Kingdom Kemetu, the ancient Chinese nobility would accompany the dead with their servants and slaves, along with other personal belongings, a practice that was later discontinued in Kemet. In Kemet, it was frequent to bury the dead with their board games and their boat. The Egyptians believed that it would help their soul travel to the afterlife. Many ancient Chinese graves had had board games and chariots instead, but the cultural motifs are identical: pyramids, sarcophagus, burying of belongings, vessels for the afterlife. Again, the similarities are too significant to be dismissed, and we can see how the ancient from the Nubio-Kemetic Civilization complex, especially its ruling class, sparked the early Chinese civilization. This even extends to the scribes. The scribe was also very important in both civilizations, but also the concept of the god-king, both taken from the ancient Egyptians. Even the concept of ancestor worship that the Chinese started to practice in dynastic times came from the Africans. Another very interesting fact is that the Shang dynasty, the founding dynasty of China, practiced the African child naming convention by assigning names corresponding to the weekday they were born. For example, in Ghana, the Ashanti still name their kids Kufuor, Kujo, Kwame, and so forth, which are old Kemetic names, from their migration all the way back in ancient Kemet to the Ghana Empire situated in Mali to their present kingdom. This practice was also present in the ancient Chinese Shang dynasty. Another coincidence between Kemet and China is that their calendars were somewhat similar. Chinese calendar is described as a lunisolar calendar, just like its older Kemetic counterpart. But one question still remains. Was it just a cultural influence, or did a large contingent of Kemetu, ancient Egyptians, settle in China in the Bronze Age? To begin, we must understand how ancient China started and the dynasties that created it. There are three founding dynasties in ancient China: the Jia dynasty, 1900 to 1700 BC, Shang Yin dynasty, 1700 to 1050 BC, and the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty was the first dynasty founded by the Mongoloid people in China. The Xia and Shang dynasties are said to have been founded by a people who came from the West, those who have been called the Na-Ki, which translates to Na, black, Ki, man. This would imply the first two oldest dynasties of China, the ones that brought in the foundations of their civilization, including writing and pyramid building, were black African, or at the least ruled by black people from the West. That black civilization, as we have seen from research covered in previous videos, spanned from the Western Sahara to Kemet Egypt, Asia Minor, and as we shall see today, Far East. That is China. The same Nubian stock that started the Greek, Etruscans, and Sumerian civilization. There is now a very large body of evidence, skeletal evidence, written account, artistic depictions, and oral history that shows that well into the Bronze Age, a very powerful black civilization ruled from Western Sahara all the way to Levant, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, China, and Japan. Throughout all these lands, numerous skeletal remains and antecedents depicting clearly Africoid gods are present. They even crossed the Atlantic and helped seed civilization in Mesoamerica, as we have seen in our previous videos. If ever there was a case for an Atlantean civilization that was spreading technology and know-how to the whole world, that would be that civilization of black people, which lasted from 12,000 BC, when Africoid black people discovered agriculture in the Levant and spread it around the known world. Ancient Egypt was but a division of this ancient civilization, as their own texts attest. But this is a topic for another day. The first Chinese emperor, Shang Tang, the ruler of the Na-Ki, the black men, brought about several totems of civilization China. Among his credits are establishing government and originating social institutions, as well as cultural inventions. Emperor Tang is believed to have ruled from in 1600 and started the Shang dynasty by overthrowing the last king of the Xia dynasty. Amongst the many rulers in China, Shang Tang is notable for the inventions he brought forth. He is said to be the originator of the I Ching, the Book of Change. It is among the oldest and most revered system of philosophy. Emperor Hung Wu was founder of the great Ming dynasty of China, and there are indications that these early rulers were black, revered as god kings, and then elevated to mythical figures, similar to Osiris and Imhotep. Even in the White Garment Hall of the Shaolin Monastery in Honan, Hunan province of China, there are two 12-foot-long paintings of Chinese and Africoid, black Shaolin monks training in kung fu, boxing skills together. So what are some of the references to black people's presence in consistent rulership and deification in ancient China? In Southeast Asia and southern China, ancient skeletal remains represented the earliest inhabitants to be Australoids and Negrillo Negrito. By the beginning of the present Holocene period, the population in China could be differentiated and placed into categories designating Mongoloid in the north and Oceanic on black races in the south. Both of these groups evolved out of a common Upper Pleistocene substratum, as represented by the Zhuyang and Lucian skulls. More importantly is that by at least 2500 BC, Africoids of the Mediterranean and West African type entered this area by way of India. The skeletal evidence from the Shantung and Jiangsu, China, show the modern Africoid type, especially at the initial Qinglian Qing and Maqiabang phases. Notice that 2500 BC also happens to fall in the Old Kingdom of Kemet and the height of pyramid building. Other ancient Chinese sources describe the wealthy Mon Khmer who ruled the ancient kingdoms of Chamba, Funan, and Kampa, Lin Yi, as having curly hair and black skin. We see this description often in ancient text when referring to black people. These are some of the clear phenotypes of black people from Africa, and these appear in multiple instances throughout China and Asia as a whole. The skeletal evidence of the Africoid people have been located in Majiabang, Qinglingang, Jiangxi, Pearl River Delta, Yunnan, Sichuan, Jiantung, and Shandong areas. The black people are said to have heavily influenced the culture of the northern China. Most of the northern China's Africoids are said to have come from East and West Africa. Till this day, there is strong resemblance between the ethnic Chinese and the Central African Khoisan H. Imbert, a French scholar in 1928 in Les Negritos de Chine, observed that, in the first epochs of Chinese history, the Negrito type peopled all the south of this country, and even the island of Hainan, as we have attempted to prove in our study on the Negritos, or black men of the land. There are many references to these black people in Chinese literature. According to T. de la Cauperie, the Chinese first met these tribes in 2116 BC, when they advanced eastwards of the great southern bend of the Yellow River. They are spoken of in the Zhou Li, composed under the Zhou dynasty, 1122, 249 BC, as black and oily-skinned. In 122 BC, Prince Liu Nan, who died in 122 BC, speaks of references of blacks in China as late as the Tang dynasty. In the Lin Yi Kuo Chuan, contained in Book 197 of the Chu Tang Shu, it is written that the people living to the south of Lin Yi have woolly hair and black skin. In addition to the above, Chinese folklore mentions an empress of China named Li, 373-397 AD, who was the consort of the Emperor Xiao Wu Wen, was black. In addition to fighting the Yi, The Zhou also conquered the Negritos of southern China. They defeated some but not all of the Negrito kingdoms, especially in Yunnan. The Chinese called the Negrito blacks Man and Kunlun. Many of these blacks presently live in Cochin, China, and Yunnan. The Xia people came in contact with these black inhabitants in 2116 BC. They are mentioned in the Zhou Li as living along the Yellow River. The name of the Yangtze River Basin area were also constantly at war with the Zhou. The Nam were closely related to the Tibetans of Sichuan. At this time, the Man states were ruled by princes. The arrival of black people in China in ancient times was significant enough in the Bronze Age to show up with such a high frequency in the literature and art of ancient and more recent historical China. But their presence also shows up in many other ways. When Professor Jin Li set out to prove that Chinese people descended from a different lineage of the Homo gene pool, his study led him to, in fact, confirm that all, without exception, all Chinese people are descended from black people. And I quote, "We did not see even one single individual that could be considered as a descendant of Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant from our ancestors in Africa." End quote. In time, the ethnic Chinese, just like the Mesoamericans, went on to create an equally impressive civilization that grew large and strong from their Kemetic seeding. The contribution of the Africans, however, in the early days of China, is now understood to have been decisive. Before I leave you, I would like to share with you this snippet from the YouTube channel called African History Station.
Welcome to this episode. Picture this hypothetical exchange, which is based on accurate, established historical facts. A young Nigerian named Osazuwa was sent by his parents to Tokyo in Japan to attend university there a few years back. When he arrived in Tokyo, he made friends with the local Japanese students at his university and, of course, told them his name, Osazuwa. When he did, they looked at him in shock and said to him, "Are you joking? That's a pure Japanese name." And he said to them, "Of course it's not Japanese, I'm from the Edo ethnic group in Nigeria." And the friends looked at him in even greater shock and said to him, "What did you just say your ethnic group was?" He repeated, "Edo." And then they said to him, "You've got to be kidding. Edo is the former name of Tokyo, this city we are in right now. Edo is the former name of Japan. It's also the name of the Edo Empire which reigned over Japan for centuries." Now, the Edo period of Japan was from 1603 to 1867 and was an era of military government. The dynasty was established by military commanders. Osazuwa, or Osa for short, was a history enthusiast, and he asked them who started the Edo Empire in Japan. And they said he was a military commander named Ieyasu. Osa was in total shock. The title of the military commander of the Edo Empire, i.e. the Benin Empire of Nigeria, who was second in power only to the king himself, was Iyase. As they chatted further, one of the Japanese looked up into the night sky and commented on the unusually bright moon, or Tsuki, and also asked him, "What did you just call the moon?" "Tsuki," he replied. And then Osa said, "In Edo, we call the moon Uki." And they looked at him in pure astonishment. And then he added, "Uki is also the name we use for beauty." The Japanese kids stood bolt upright as they screamed, "And Tsuki is the name we also use for beauty." As they wondered aloud in amazement, an elderly Japanese man walked up to them to ask for directions, and the Japanese students greeted him by saying respectfully, "Domo, domo." Osa heard them and nearly fell off his chair. He said, "That's exactly how we greet elders in Edoland. We say, Domo."
Make sure you follow him for excellent coverage of African history narrative. One thing is certain, is that history becomes far more interesting to study when the veil of racism is removed. 有一件事是肯定的，当种族主义的面纱被除去时，研究历史就会变得更加有趣。 For those who can, please consider becoming a Patreon or donating via Buy Me a Coffee or via crypto donations. Even those who donate $1 help us gain access to more paywalled research. This is important because the historical narrative often available online or in printed media rarely covers our truth. Many of the important studies are hiding behind academic subscriptions, and your small donations help me get to these articles that I often cite in my videos.
It's Big V, the prolific producer.
If you liked this content, drop us a comment. Above all, share it with everyone you think can benefit from it. We hear a lot about the negative voices, but it warms our hearts to hear your positive comments. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.